So I've traced the family back pretty much directly. I mean, there's always a little cloudiness in the thing for about 1,000 years. And then there's sporadic records and mentions and things in archives that actually take the family back about another 1,000 years. So, start off, the Roman Emperor Hadrian really did not like the Scottish. Mainly because they kind of kicked the Romans' butts on a semi-regular basis. So the Roman Emperor Hadrian actually went up and built a wall across the entire English-Scottish border. So the wall was completed in about 128, 130 AD, so quite some time ago. And the western end of the wall ended near a body of water called the Solway Firth, which is just the Atlantic Ocean jutting in on the English-Scottish border. Right next to the Solway Firth there are marshes, called appropriately the Solway Marshes. Well, at the western end of Hadrian's Wall, they called it Hadrian's Dyke. And it ended in a place called Dykes Field. And there sat our ancestors in a hut, essentially. So that is the origin of our family. And I know it's hard for people to see, but right across, it's about 87 miles across the English-Scottish border, and right at the western end is Dykes Field. Sorry, I keep crossing in front of you. So just a couple of years ago, my son and I, actually about 4 years ago, we actually met our esteemed cousin Lee, who is wandering around here somewhere, the fellow with the funny accent. And he still currently lives about 150 miles or so from where the Dykeses lived 2,000 years ago. So he's from the non-adventurous side of the family. And so we met on Facebook. My son and I went over, and the three of us hiked across Hadrian's Wall and, learned a little bit about the Dykes' history along the way, saw some cool stuff, including, I don't know if anyone's ever seen the movie Robin Hood, but right at the very beginning with Kevin Costner, and he rescues the little kid that comes out of the tree, rescues him from the Sheriff of Nottingham. This is the tree, and it is along Hadrian's Wall, and unfortunately, I only took a picture of it when I was playing with filters on my phone. So there really is color in England, in spite of what this is. But that's a very famous spot along Hadrian's Wall. So there is Lee along Hadrian's Wall. And if you look closely, he's having an out-of-body experience. There's, for some reason, an echo of Lee in the picture, but, we don't know why, but again, that just a little lower hike along the way. So what we have here is, this is the original, earliest known form of the official Dykes family coat of arms. Now this is a partial. We're missing the green lobster on that side is supposed to be actually over here. So I'm a Steelers fan, so this is great. The official family colors of the Dykes family are black and gold. So just, no. They drowned those guys in the marsh. So over on the far side is actually the coat of arms of a family called Valentine, who in about the 14 or 1500s, the Dykeses and the Valentines, one branch of them merged, and so that's why this has both the coat of arms of the Dykeses and the Valentines in it, and it does have our family motto, which I will explain in a slide or two. But this, both of these are official Dykes coats of arms registered with the Armourer General in England. So Unlike a lot of families where you just see stuff on the internet, we actually have an official coat of arms. This was just kind of an interesting thing. The Dykeses did have a considerable amount of property. The reason a lobster was on the family crest, for instance, they were fishmongers. They had fishing fleets, and that's where they made their money. And being right on the English-Scottish border during the very famous border wars, like if you ever saw like Braveheart with Mel Gibson, right? The Dykeses were right in the middle of all that. So Carlisle, which is the largest city in northwest England, is about 80 miles away from Dumfries in Scotland, which was the seat of power of the Bruces, which again, I'll refer to the movie. The dude that betrayed everybody, you know, even though he didn't want to, the young good-looking guy, you know, with that they took his helmet off after the battle and he had betrayed them all. His name was Robert the Bruce, and Dumfries was their seat of power. So the Dykeses were literally about halfway in the middle. So as a result, you know, we kind of covered our butts. We would supply cavalry and soldiers to both sides, so whoever won, we won. Thinking. We were thinking. So this here is actually a picture of a tunic button, the button on one of the tunics of a member of the Dykes family household. Now this would have been after the combination with the Ballantines, which is why you have the griffin and of course the Dykes lobster. So, no, that's a tunic button. You know, so to keep you from wiping your nose on your sleeve. At least that's why they say Napoleon did it, right? But this also has the Dykes family motto. Oh, you'll see, it's actually pretty good. So this is just to show, and again, you know, I'm sticking a little with the geography of England, but Dykesfield House, which was the Dykeses, the main house that's still there was built over top of a dwelling from the 1300s. The house that's there now was built in the 1700s, but it's currently owned by an archaeologist whom we met, and I told him the story of, you know, that the family was supposedly there before Hadrian built the wall, and he said, strangely enough, I'm actually excavating a pre-Roman dwelling on the property. So again, the area here is where the family was for you know, quite some time. So again, just geography picture. This is the Solway Marshes that I spoke about earlier. That's right outside of Dykesfield. It's right on the border and where the kind of the wall ends. What happened? Okay, so there's Lee and myself out in front of Dykesfield House. There's Lee in front of Dykesfield. He, by the way, he insisted this picture be in here. But it is a good view of the gates. And that is the front. Dykesfield House was under construction, where they were refurbishing it while we were there. This is a picture out front. And the backyard. You may as well get to see it all, right? And by the way, everyone, I know my little sister's been going around having everybody sign an entry book, and hopefully you're putting your email address and everything. I will send a copy of this to everyone, whether you want it or not. Okay, so now we go to one of our ancestors, and this will explain the family motto. So Thomas Dykes, and I've seen in different pieces of literature, he definitely was a royalist. He was an ardent supporter of Charles I. I have actually seen things that said he was his personal ship's captain. Now, I've been researching this stuff for 25 years, and a lot of the paper stuff that I collected like 20-some years ago in a military move, just the military evidently wanted it, so I think it's in CIA headquarters somewhere, but I lost it. So some of the early stuff, it's stuff I remember, and now I'm trying to find. What was the battle? Maston Moor? After the Battle of Maston Moor, Thomas Dykes' side lost the battle, and Oliver Cromwell's side won. Well, Thomas Dykes fled to his estate, and he was later found hiding in a mulberry tree, which, by the way, is now the symbol of the Dykes family as well, the mulberry tree. The other thing is out now. So, he was told he could either, renounce the king, or he could die, at which point he supposedly said, prius frangator quam flectator, which means sooner broken than bent. So you mentioned stubborn. Yeah. So yes, so he would rather die than denounce his king, at which point he was executed. So, and his estate was fined around 100,000 pounds, which is quite, it's somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars today. So he was actually fairly wealthy. I'll let Lee do the conversion to pounds. And most of the information comes out, and I don't know if you're interested, but there's a really interesting book called Burke's Landed Gentry of England, which goes into all the non-royal but wealthy families of England back in ancient times. So he was executed at Cockermouth Castle, which is here for your viewing pleasure. Hopefully, I know the people in the back probably can't see, but again, I will make sure everybody that wants it gets a copy. So before I move it on to the States, so the family up there, up around Dykesfield, at some point around the 1400s to 1500s, started to branch out of Cumberland. Some of them went kind of due east into Yorkshire, which is where Lee's family still lives today. And then some of them went down around London to the Kent and Sussex, where their fortunes actually, they did quite well. And two branches of the family, they ended up as the baronets of Cranbrook, Kent, and the baronets of Horham, Sussex. And baronet is an inherited title, so it's part of the nobility, but it is basically the lowest level of nobility, which tells you they were probably really wealthy and they bugged someone important long enough that they got a title. So, one of the baronets of Kent, around the late 1500s, early 1600s, a gentleman named Captain John Smith, who a lot of people learned about in American history, started something called the Virginia Company of London. The Virginia Company of London was a private company that received a charter from the King of England to develop colonies in the New World. So the first supply ship, or the first group, came over in 1607, and the first resupply came over in 1608. And in that first and second resupply, which were just a few months apart, three individuals, Henry Dykes, Mary Dykes, and Walter Dykes, two siblings, Henry and Mary, and their first cousin, Walter, all adventurers in the Virginia Company of London, which means they paid some money, right? They came into Virginia. So the Dykes family and our direct ancestors have been in America, or what would become America, essentially since the very beginning. They've never been able to get rid of us. We just spread. So Captain John Smith you know, what can you say, right? And when you look, especially the people with red name tags, Abner was trying to populate his entire own city, but we'll come to that later. So Thomas Dykes, the Baronet of Kent, he sent Henry, who was his third son. So the third son basically inherited nothing. So he bought him 160 acres of land and shipped him off to the New World. Now another first cousin actually made something of himself, and I believe John Dykes, and he was actually another first cousin. He actually was the deputy commissioner of safety for the Virginia colonies, and the deputy, let's see, what was it? Deputy, where was he? Yeah, deputy governor of the Somers Isles, which is now Barbados. So he actually had a little higher, more elevated position. And so all of these guys, their father and uncle, he was on the board of directors of the Virginia Company of London and was good friends with Captain John Smith, which makes it even more of a mystery why Captain John Smith kept spelling their last names wrong. Every time he wrote it, he did it a different way. So that's one of the things you'll find if you ever get into genealogy. The Dykes name you'll see spelled about 20 different ways, which seems weird to be able to do with 5 letters, but trust me. All right, so the one gentleman, Henry Dykes, he was what's called an ancient planter. And the only reason I bring that up, there's only like 30 or 40 of them. So they're a fairly rare group. So it's people that arrived in Virginia before Sir Thomas Dale, who was the first real official governor, and survived the Indian Massacre of 1623. And it was one of the ones that they did, not one of the ones we perpetrated. So, you know, it was just, but there was only 40 of them that listed, and were actually, you know, officially Henry Dykes, who his name is spelled D-A-W-K-E-S in the listing, but he was an ancient planter. It's kind of like being a Mayflower person, but in Virginia. So this is just a map of kind of what Virginia looked like. This is probably around 1650. And I just wanted to point out, so that first gentleman that came in, Henry, and this was actually his piece of land here that juts out into the James River, and I never get the pronunciation correct. I believe it's Varinas, V-A-R-I-N-A-S, sometimes V-E-R-I-N-A-S, but he essentially became a tobacco farmer very early on. Okay, so let me go back up again. So in between arriving here in around 1608, it's a little sketchy, all the siblings and different stuff. I've been able to trace like a couple of direct lines. So we end up in roughly the same area. I'm skipping forward about 100 years. We had numerous people that were like militia colonels and different stuff through colonial times, people that helped survey land, build roads, and they were, you know, fairly well-to-do. So we come to Henry Dykes, born in 1711. So for those of you, I know we have a number of people that are down in Kentucky, and there's a number of like kind of different sets of the Dykes family down in Kentucky. So our direct group are the people that tend to be like Wolfe County and Floyd, Magoffin, and even, I guess, Johnson, but that general area. But there's also other pockets like down around, there's actually a town, Dykes, Kentucky, down around Somerset. And then there's Dykeses up in Bourbon County, and just different spots. Well, all of those Kentucky Dykeses, except for the ones right that we all kind of know in Wolfe and McGough and everything, they are descended from other children of Henry Dykes that was born in 1711. So they're kind of like our 6th and 7th cousins, kinda. You know, I'd have to figure out the direct relationships. So in this group, so James Dykes, who you'll see me refer to him, I call him Old James, because James T, who we are all descended from, Old James is either his grandfather or his father. And the most muddy area in like our tracing our family back is that relationship. Who is really James T's father? So just to give you an idea, and let me get on the other side here. And I know this is kind of a busy slide and really hard to see, but from the time of about 1730 or 40 up until about 1800, our part of the Dykes clan was basically in southwestern Virginia, the bordering counties of North Carolina, the counties here in Tennessee. So amongst with you know, their immediate first and second cousins. So there were a lot of Dykeses because I think they kept kicking us out to the frontier, right? It would get civilized, we would move on. You know, it kind of probably continues today. You know.
You didn't kick us out. We wanted to move.
Oh, okay. That's another way to look at it. So, so Old James, who was traveling with a number of cousins, he first came into Kentucky through a place called Flat Gap. It's not the Cumberland Gap. It's not, you know, there's a number of ones that a lot of people came through. The Dykeses kind of snuck in. So as they came in through Flat Gap, they kind of took a left and just went to the headwaters of the Cumberland River. Now, the court records and land deeds and everything from that were basically, the courthouses were burned, sometimes accidentally, sometimes on purpose, a lot in Kentucky. One of the reasons I've actually found is if there were disputes over coal, over mining rights and stuff, a wealthy coal company may actually pay someone to throw some dynamite into the courthouse and blow up the records. And at that point, whoever had the most money and the best lawyers got to claim the land. So that was evidently, according to the head librarian down in Breathitt County, which, by the way, is nicknamed Bloody Breathitt, which we'll go into a little bit later. But our family was involved in some feuds down in that area. But yeah, Bloody Breathitt was the epicenter of a lot of this type of activity. So, by 1813, Old James Dykes, and just kind of a, I don't know, maybe a sordid tidbit from our past, but his second wife, Priscilla, whom he married when he was 55, was actually his 17-year-old niece. But, so, you know, that may explain some things in the family too. I don't know. But he arrived into Floyd County, or what is now really Magoffin County, Prater's Fort, I think it was at the time, which were related to the Praters too. But that is now Salyersville, essentially. So he was on the same piece of property that anyone, by the way, that wants to go tomorrow, we're going to take a drive down there.
Where, Salyersville?
Salyersville, yeah. And that was Floyd County at the time. When you do research in genealogy, you go, man, these people just moved constantly. But they really didn't. A lot. The county lines would just move around them. So one census, you'd find them in one county, and you'd find them in a different one the next. And tax records, you'd find them on in between. And then they might go to a closer courthouse to report their tax or their land for taxes. So that messes you up too. So, you know, it's kind of an art form figuring out what's really going on sometimes. But so old James had 5 or 6 kids, a lot of daughters that got married off to the kind of, I don't know if they're prominent, it just seems like they are, just because I know who they are so well. It seems like the 1820 Floyd County census, it seems like we're related to everyone. So if you go down to McGoffin County today at all, chances are we're related to everyone 3 different ways. So this is old James and his family. So I have right here that he had a son, Isham, which Isham's kind of a different name, but it runs throughout the Dykes family beginning in the early 1700s. It's a good way to know, like, if you run across someone, that it's one of our fairly close relatives, at least that branched off from the James in 1711. And the reason that name got into our family, I found one time, on one of the tax lists, that Henry Dykes had lived next door to a gentleman whose surname was Isham. He named one of his children after it, and it just came down through the family. Look, Amy, there's an Amy. So that brings us to James T., who we are all descended from. And like I said, James T., I've never been able to pin down exactly who his father is. And the reason, on the 1820 Floyd County censuses, there's 2 Dykes families next door to each other. One headed by James Dykes, the old James, and one by his son, Isham. So, of course, James T. was not born in 1820. But there are a number of individuals in both households. Then on the 1830 Floyd County census, all that's left is Isham and James T. Now, on the 1830 census, they only put the names of the head of household. I know that James T. was on there just because of his age, and I was able to follow him coming of age. But there's no way to know for sure that I've found that whether or not James T. is the son of Isham, or he was the son of old James, and everybody died and James T. was left. Because I do know there was like a cholera epidemic or something that swept through that area and killed a lot of people between 1820 and 1830. So now, out of all of let's see, how many kids did he have? 9 children. Only 5 of them had descendants. So Abner was the oldest, and if you look around you, all the people with red name tags, at least theoretically, are descended from Abner, if they got the right color name tags. And then, now Nancy, she had stepchildren, but she never had children of her own. George Washington Dykes, that's we yellow people. Then Martin Van Buren, that's the white name tags, if you look around. And then Henry Clay, we have one representative, and that's the blue name tag. Go Jan! Woo! And then the greens, which we have a handful, just so they are from Nathan Hale. So of course, the Henry Clay and Nathan Hale people will do better next time in motivating people to show up. But
it's a long trip from Washington.
But well worth it.
Well worth it.
So this is the family from which all of us sprang, so to speak. And just so this map actually shows kind of where they started out in 1800 when they first came into Kentucky, and then over the next 100 years or so, this is kind of the path they migrated along. And they had different properties along the way. Where James T. Dykes is buried is right in here. Alichawa, have to put Alichawa on because that's where Emma Jean's from, so we had to call that out special. So, but as you can see, they didn't really go all that far. But it's interesting when you research it, it really seems like they moved further. But then when you put it on the map, you're like, oh, they could have walked that in a few weeks. Which, by the way, they did. You know, one of the things I found that they were actually quite connected and came back and forth. It actually seems like quite a drive sometimes, but if you walk it as or go as the crow flies, or you know, or better yet, unless you have a giant crow, you could ride a horse. And a lot of the people were fairly close. Okay, so this I was just blow up of where like we're gonna head down tomorrow for anybody that wants to go. But this is where the James T. Dykes grave site, and like I said, it's on the farm. It's still owned by actually Harlan's one of our distant cousins, Harlan Rao. But James is buried there on the farm that has been in the family since about that we settled around 1813. And I believe that is it. So I'm open, you know, if anybody has questions, I will do my best to answer them. I have a, you know, fairly decent knowledge base on the stuff. Some specific family lines I don't know, but one of the things I can do also, if anybody has questions that I can't answer, we can write them down and I will actually try to find the answers for everyone.
Ben, were we ever Van Dykes? Because I thought my mom said, I thought somebody said that Van
okay, so the question up front, someone asked, were we ever Van Dykes? No. But we were way back Del Dykes, D-E-L, which just meant of the. So we, like the very earliest guys, like there was a guy that was the sheriff of Cumberland. He was William Del Dykes. And then somewhere like around the 14 or 1500s, the Del dropped out of it, although some people still use it. Does anybody else have any questions?
No, sir.
All right, well, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you learned something.
Thank you, Ben. Ben.
And of course, the most important part was our official colors are black and gold.